So thanks very much for engaging with the session. My name's Chris Hand. I'm currently the program leader for the MSc Psychological Studies degree. I'm also the course leader for one of the semester 2, which is January until March, cognitive psychology courses, which is sort of fundamental to the degree. Our degree is co-delivered by the School of Education, where I'm based, and the School of Psychology and Neuroscience. So that allows us to kind of draw on two separate pools of expertise and sort of do things in the way that some other conversions can't. Certainly in terms of being able to draw on different optional modules, because our degree is made up of core courses and optional choices. We run in the kind of traditional academic year. We sort of run from mid-September until the start of December. Then we have a winter break and we start again kind of early to mid-January until the end of March. And the dissertation runs from January until August. So it's quite nice that we have that kind of first semester to do some kind of introduction to being at Glasgow. Some of our students will have done their undergraduate in Glasgow. Some, this might be their first time in Scotland. So again, we try to be quite respectful that people are coming from different places, different academic backgrounds, different social backgrounds, and try to use that first semester to kind of make people comfortable and do some kind of foundational core psychology, core research methods. And then we make the start on the dissertation component in January, working predominantly kind of in the spring and summer months, but with some early kind of research question development, some early design choices happening alongside the top courses. It's a 180 credit degree, which is quite intense because it is one calendar year basically. 120 of those credits are taught, and 60 credits are the independent dissertation, where you work with the supervisor. Now, we're trying to be quite forward-thinking with our dissertations, so we do give people quite a lot of choice and freedom over what topics they can research. Where we are a little bit more guiding, I guess is the right word, is around maybe some of the populations that people work with. And some of that's ethical and some of it's practical. Because again, we don't want to potentially set people up to have a really difficult dissertation. So sometimes we're not so encouraging about some of the research that works with either very small populations or really hard to reach populations. We also try to encourage people to use secondary data. And one of the reasons for that is because there are some wonderful sensitive data sets that people can use in a way that's ethical and meaningful. And some of the data sets that are available are just on a scale that wouldn't be feasible to collect in a sort of 7-month project. So particularly when it comes to things like health data or criminal justice data, well-being data, even some sort of healthcare, well-being type data, educational data. Again, we can guide people to access data sets that are amazing and just beyond what any of us could do as independent researchers. So I think we're quite a sustainable course. I think we're quite an interesting degree program. And again, a lot of that comes from the kind of unique setup of working across schools and colleges. We're predominantly campus-based. There is some online independent learning. There will be things like online supervision meetings, because again, we try to respect people's need to work flexibly or their wish to work flexibly. But the vast majority of the teaching happens on campus. There are no courses that are fully online. So there is a campus presence for every single course. But that's not to say that we don't try to help people learn to work online. Because again, thinking forward, when people go into further study or people go into the world of work, a lot of training and a lot of working is going to be online. So yes, we do still have the kind of old-fashioned traditional, everybody sits in a great big lecture room and someone stands at the front and talks for a while. But we also try to have some slightly more modern ways of working, and we try to have quite a lot of small group teaching, usually in classes of around about 28 or thereabouts. And those are your more kind of traditional tutorials, seminars, research methods, labs, because again, the opportunity to do either independent working or small group working, or kind of a bit more intimately with your peers and the teaching team, that's really valuable. So again, we put a lot of emphasis on the small group sessions. Because we know that they can be really, really good places for skills development, or for asking for support, or learning about the assessments, understanding the assessments. So yes, there's quite a lot of independent working, but there's also a lot of guidance. So I do think it's a challenging degree, but hopefully it's one that people find interesting and rewarding. And again, we're mindful that people come from a lot of different places academically and socially, and we're also mindful that people wish to go to a lot of different destinations. So some people want to go into sort of formal training to be a practitioner psychologist, maybe in clinical, counselling, health, sport and exercise, forensic, educational. So a lot of the course is kind of geared towards understanding how you make that next step. We don't necessarily do practitioner work. So you wouldn't necessarily be working with clients or patients, but working on the kind of key skills that you would use in that further training, and kind of gaining the knowledge base to then apply in future training is something that we're conscious of. About the same amount of people wish to go on to do a PhD. By research. So again, we put a lot of emphasis on research methods and research analysis, data handling, data reporting, communication of science. We do a lot of this stuff. And an awful lot of people want to go on to, wild and wonderful things that aren't really psychology per se. So again, we do quite a lot of kind of general employability stuff. So that's about critical thinking, or about coding, or about understanding human behavior, how to work as a group, how to lead, how to follow. And we again are kind of mindful that for some people this is this is not necessarily a route to being a practitioner, or not necessarily a route to becoming an academic. So we are trying to be respectful of those trajectories and destinations, so that again we're preparing people for whatever comes next, while kind of being mindful that the whatever comes next is really varied. So that's my kind of blurb, I guess. I'm happy to answer any questions you've got about the program, or specific courses, or assessments, or employment, or further study. I know that seems a bit weird to already be talking about what comes next.
No, I'm already thinking about it, Kristen.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. That's great. Yeah.
That's really helpful. I think the thing that I was a wee bit worried about is, obviously my original degree was literature, and that was 10 odd years ago. I'm in my mid-30s now, and kind of started this course because a lot of the work I do currently is with care experienced young people, and kind of want to do that kind of pivot. But I think, I would like to go on and do a PhD. It's something I've been looking at for the last year or so. I've done quite a lot of research into it, but I suppose my main anxiety would be, it has been such a long time since I've done any kind of, and I do a lot of data handling in my current role, but research wise, and so whether or not doing this course would be sufficient, or whether an MRes would, as an interim step, is potentially the way forward for me. And obviously we'd like to stay at Glasgow. I know that you can do the kind of the stepping stone to doing a PhD, but then I was like, oh God, is that really early to be asking supervisors kind of start of next year to be like, hey, can you write me recommendations or advice on funding? And
I'll be honest, I don't think it's too early to start thinking about those things, and actually maybe even doing some of that early exploration, because that kind of gives you time to maybe start to build those relationships, and maybe start to identify funding opportunities. And quite importantly, maybe figuring out who is the right person to work with. I mean, thinking about a PhD is exciting. Thinking about the right research question, the right methodologies, but also the right people in the right places. So sometimes about PhD planning is thinking about where you want to be, and also starting to kind of feel out a little bit of the relationship, because it can be quite an intense relationship at
Yeah.
certain points of the PhD journey. So it's a bit like making a new friend or a new relationship. You know, if it doesn't feel right from the start, you maybe don't want to go too far down that road. And there is an interpersonal element to it. Some people just click better than others for whatever reason. So starting that conversation even before you start the masters is not a bad idea.
Okay, and that's good because I
Yeah,
had kind of reached out to a couple of people,
yeah,
and I guess there's a couple of things I'm interested in, and trying to narrow those down. But it's conscious that academics are incredibly busy, and
yeah. But I mean, again, this is why it's good to maybe start having these conversations sooner rather than later,
yeah,
especially around about springtime when people are maybe starting to think about closing off one academic year and thinking ahead to future academic years. One of the things that will help you do when you're on the program is how to write a proposal, how to liaise with our careers team about things like interview skills, personal statements. Because again, for a lot of people, it's maybe been a while since they've done that. Certainly done it in a kind of academic context. So again, we try to be quite conscious of that and try to help people be prepared for some of those steps. And we'll also kind of help you learn about some websites that are useful for finding like funded PhD opportunities, because increasingly universities kind of recruit to their PhDs.
yeah.
So they maybe actually have the project and the fees and a stipend, and then they kind of recruit to it almost like a job, while also still having the kind of more traditional student-led approach where you have your idea and you have a tentative methodology, and then you kind of try to find the people to help be part of your supervisory team. So yeah, having those conversations early is a great idea.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was just annoying people at this stage, kind of because
No, no. I mean, I think what from my experience, what can be more frustrating is when someone sort of writes to you with a really good idea, but there's just no time. You know, there's no time to kind of go through the application process, because again, although it's maybe a bit formal, maybe not the right word. Although it's maybe sometimes a little bit less uh, timelined than kind of applying to the top courses. There usually still is a formal application process, and every university will have a slightly different one. So again, trying to understand what is the process of applying for the university and the supervisory team that you want to work with can be a wee bit time consuming. But again, there are increasingly these opportunities where you're basically recruited to it like a job. And again, we try to help you understand where do you find out about those opportunities, how do you be competitive, and that goes back to one of your other points about an MRes versus this. Let's just talk about this MSc rather than some of the other ones. So I think one of the things that this MSc Psychological Studies is really good for is that it has a really substantial research methods component. So 40 of the 120 top credits are research methods, and then the 60 credit dissertation is obviously a third of the total degree. Now, a lot of other MSc degrees might only have maybe about a fifth of the credits being taught research methods, a fifth or even a sixth. And the dissertation is sometimes around about 25%, whereas ours is much larger. So certainly in terms of someone who was then maybe applying to either a taught doctorate or an MSc forensic or a PhD program, or even jobs where research is important or data handling is important, I think our graduates can write really, really powerful applications because they've got that evidence base of saying, not only have I got an MSc, it's got a really big chunk of research methods. And because it is so big and chunky, that actually allows us to be a bit more diverse in the methods and the analyses that we actually cover within our research methods training. So again, I think in terms of being competitive for PhDs, taught doctorates, jobs, volunteering opportunities, I think our kind of focus on a research-based, it's a kind of research-based taught degree, if that makes sense.
That's
Because
helpful. Yeah.
psychology doesn't exist without research. Otherwise, it's opinion, otherwise, or coincidence, or misinterpretation. So yeah, research is kind of at the heart of pretty much all of our teaching. So a lot of the taught courses will be focusing about how to understand evidence. So yeah, you're obviously learning knowledge about psychology, but a lot of it's about how do you critically evaluate it, and how do you understand what evidence is trustworthy. So an MRes, there's nothing against MReses. You know, MReses are really valuable, and again, they would be great training for a PhD. But those are, you know, yeah, I guess there will be some taught components to an MRes. There'll be a huge independent research element, but you know, it's a valuable degree, as an MRes. And again, the story you're telling me about your academic background and your sort of interim period between degrees is really common. So, you know,
Yeah.
the majority of students on our course come from either arts and humanities or other parts of the social sciences. We get a few STEM people and a few education people, but the majority come from arts and humanities or other branches of social sciences. And I would say on average, people usually have maybe about 8 to 10 years of a gap. Some will come quite quickly from undergraduate. The people that tend to do that have maybe done part of the degree was in psychology. Maybe they did quite a lot of psychology, but in another country, and the degree isn't necessarily recognised by the British Psychological Society. But the majority of the cohort, I would say, are either mature students or kind of on the edge of mature studenthood. And often people have had a fairly decent gap for whatever reason, whether it's caring responsibilities or family commitments or working commitments, or they just didn't think they wanted or needed to do further study.
Yeah,
So yeah,
that's reassuring.
I really like working on this MSc because it is a bit different. I've worked in a few different universities, and I've worked undergraduate, postgraduate, top doctorate, all these things. And some degrees kind of have that more traditional, more kind of homogenous cohort, where it's usually just people that have come straight from the undergraduate with no gap, sort of early to mid 20s, and you know, you tend to get a lot of that in the kind of more practitioner-based degrees. So MSc Forensic, MSc Health, these kind of things. People are maybe going straight in from undergrad. Whereas our degree is a bit more of a rich tapestry in terms of where people are coming from, sort of geographically and academically, but also in terms of that life experience. And I think the people in our course tend to be pretty interesting people, and you know, it's an interesting group to work with, because there is such a diversity in thinking and ideas and backgrounds, and I think that makes us stronger, because
That's reassuring. I think it was one of those things I always intended to go and do a PhD, and then got a good job, and then 10 years flew by, and I was like, God, am I now past the stage of being able to kind of go back and do this? But
and see, to be honest with you, I think universities are getting, as a sector, universities are getting better at supporting people to do it in that way. You know, for a lot of time, universities were kind of quite biased towards the traditional model of through without much gap, and weren't necessarily the best at supporting people that had non-traditional journeys. But I think as a sector, we're getting better at that. And again, we work really closely with our student learning development team, because we can deal with a lot of the really psychology specific stuff, whereas we have these experts around database searching or around academic writing, and presentation skills, So, you know, we have these dedicated teams that we work hand in glove with to kind of do that scaffolded support. We have excellent transition pathways. We have a really good induction program. So we do some induction at school level, we do some induction at program level, some is more college level, some's university level. And what we're trying to do with induction is we're trying to make it what's called a long and thin. So rather than trying to sort of smash you with loads of data on one day of 1 week in September, we tend to have kind of touching points throughout the year. And for the last couple of years, I've invited all the psych study students to a special session in January, which is kind of like a reinduction. Because again, you know, September to January is a fair old chunk of time, and the courses that we do in semester one are not the same courses as semester two, and people are starting to really get excited about the dissertation. So again, we tend not to kind of fling you in at the deep end in September and leave you there. We try to do these kind of events and workshops and make resources available all the way through the academic year. Hello, Melton. Thanks for joining us. I've just been explaining to Dania that the session's being recorded, so please feel free to use the chat window if you'd rather not unmute yourself. And obviously, it's entirely up to you if you turn your camera on or not. So I'm happy to answer either of you if you have any questions or if there's something you want me to talk in more detail about. I'll be really happy to do that.
Hi, Christopher. Sorry, we are outside.
Sure.
Just a quick question, like we wanted to check, what does registering mean as a psychologist? Like, for example, apart from PhD, what other routes your graduate students take, and can they work in NHS, for example?
That's a great question. So I would say maybe about 1 in 4, maybe 1 in 5 of our graduates go on to training as maybe either a clinical psychologist or a counselling psychologist, educational psychology, health psychology, sport and exercise, forensic psychology, occupational psychology is becoming quite popular also. So those are the kind of chartered routes that the British Psychological Society has further training for. So our degree is the kind of key that unlocks those doors to be able to enter onto some of the kind of practitioner degrees. Around about the same proportion of students go on to PhD, and some sort of go directly into working for education authorities, local authorities, health providers, NHS Scotland, NHS across the rest of the UK. So our degree is very helpful. Psychologists are usually pretty high in demand from lots of different sectors and lots of different employers. But we're mindful that not everybody wants to become a practitioner psychologist. Some people go to work in human resources. Some people work for the emergency services. Some people go to work as classroom assistants. And again, we try to kind of give people a really good transferable skill set, whether that's around being able to use evidence or being able to communicate or make decisions in an informed way. We're really, really mindful that a lot of people want to go on to be practitioner psychologists, but an awful lot of them don't. So again, we try to be quite flexible and quite wide in the things that we cover, so that we try to prepare as many people for as many different things as possible. And we within our virtual learning environment, which is called Moodle, within our Moodle websites, we have a lot of links to the British Psychological Society careers and training websites. We also have links to our own university careers service, which is a wonderful service, because again, we want people to feel that they have the knowledge and the confidence to be ready for whatever comes next. But I think that's one of the nice things, is that our graduates or our students they come to the program for different reasons. They come to the program with different goals. They come with different visions. And again, what I think is actually quite reassuring is there's a lot of people don't really know what they want to do next. And it's always really interesting to kind of see how people's thoughts and feelings change over the academic year. And again, we try to help people make those decisions. Again, the city of Glasgow is a good place if you want to kind of go down the practitioner route, because either University of Glasgow or Glasgow Caledonian or Strathclyde or University of the West of Scotland, they have a really wide suite of degrees that are offered. So again, it might feel a bit premature to be thinking about what comes next, but I actually don't think that's premature. I think it's important to be thinking about next steps now, because you know this degree is really portable. You know, it opens a lot of doors. It makes you eligible for a lot of opportunities. Some of those are in psychology, some of those are in other parts of social sciences, education, but also in terms of just going into the world of work. This is a valuable degree, and what we do on the degree makes people quite competitive when they go into whatever comes next.
Thank you.
Chris, in terms of how many people go on to do something, like obviously it's quite different, neuroscience or brain sciences, or obviously those disciplines are quite different. And do you ever have people that do this and then psychological sciences and then that, or?
So I don't know of anyone who's done psych studies and psych science. I think that would be a bit redundant, to be honest, because they're both conversion degrees. We have had graduates who have done this degree and then maybe done an MSc in neuroscience or an MSc in cognitive neuroscience or neurophysiology. So again, what this degree does is it gives a blend of knowledge and skills that would be really useful on one of those slightly different academic disciplines. But you know, there's so much overlap between psychology and neuroscience. Computer science, we have people that go into computer science, people that go into biotechnology.
Yeah, that was going to be my next.
Neurotechnology is becoming a really big thing.
Yeah, was around the doctorate training for AI, because I know there's a good link there at the university, but I've kind of had a look and I know they're not kind of advertising too much at the moment.
So again, you know, artificial intelligence is kind of the elephant in the room. It's kind of starting to touch on pretty much everything we do, and the university's position is to kind of embrace it, because we know that employers want people to be familiar with AI and they want people to have AI literacy. But also as psychologists, we can help people design systems. We can think about ethical and appropriate uses of AI. We can think about potential pitfalls of using AI. So again, we try not to make everything about AI just because it can get a little bit tedious. But at the same time, it would be really naive of us to say you're not using it, or it would be really naive of us to kind of put our head in the sand and pretend that it's not there. And I think it's unfortunate that a lot of the conversation about AI has kind of seen it as this bogeyman or this golem. But really, again, in terms of things like reducing inequalities and potentially improving healthcare provision and all these things, as long as the models are trained well and in a representative and inclusive way, they could be great. And again, in terms of assessment, the university tries to be quite clear about there are certain circumstances where we really don't want you using AI to help you with your assessments. There are other assessments where you will be explicitly asked to use AI. So whether that's to maybe debug some code that you're doing data analysis with, or whether it's to generate a piece of art or an illustration, or whether it's to ask you to generate something that's a bit more academic and then do a critical evaluation of how well the AI did its job. Again, we're not daft enough to pretend that isn't happening. We're not daft enough to pretend that it's not the future, because it absolutely is. And yeah, I went to a really interesting talk given by a philosopher from Rotterdam, maybe Amsterdam last week, and it was all about techno diversity. So again, we like to try and expose people to different technologies. We like to try and encourage people to use learning technology, and AI is just part of that. And yeah, 100% it's the future. Someone said that things like coding and programming won't be done by a human being probably within
No, it's
years.
that's what we're doing currently is we're building a language learning model and developing an app for mentored young people. And obviously there's quite a lot of, it's one of the reasons I wanted to come and do this, because there's quite a lot of crossover with some of the, so yeah, if I was doing a PhD, that's likely where I would want to go with that. So yeah, it was just to get a bit of an idea on how that currently sits.
Yeah, I mean that's my original PhD my original PhD proposal was about things like language learning models, and then I ended up doing something different, partly because the tech wasn't where it needed to be to kind of do the things that I wanted to do. But yeah, again, our university is a really interesting place because we are such an interdisciplinary university. So again, some of the things that we're trying to be really proactive about is making students aware of things like guest lectures and seminars and workshops and resources and online trainings, because although our degree is pretty intense in terms of sort of coursework and assessment and teaching timetable, we do want people to try to engage with other things that are relevant to what they want to do next. So, that might be online learning modules, or it might be going to a seminar or a guest lecture. So again, we try to be quite proactive in encouraging people to do that, because it's great if you get your degree, but you don't want to be looking back in a few years thinking, oh, all I did was my degree. That's probably my biggest regret. And I think if you speak to most people that work in universities and you say, if you could go back and do one thing differently when you were a student, it would probably be like do more stuff. Sort of go to more things, join clubs and societies, because that's kind of being lost a little bit. And it's understandable because there's usually costs, or people have got responsibilities outside the university. So people maybe don't have the time and money that historically people might have had, which I think is really sad. And, I think trying to maybe join the psychology society or the sports society or the gaming society or languages or whatever, film and television, whatever you're into, we're still, we're still in quite a good place in terms of the sort of clubs and societies and stuff outside the degree that we do. I think we're in a slightly better position than some other places.
Thank you. And then the only other question I had, and then I'll stop asking.
That's fine. No, questions are good.
Is,
questions are great.
In terms of kind of class hours and time, obviously it'll depend on what modules you pick up with the optional, but the kind of average amount of time on campus, off campus.
Yeah. So compared to an undergraduate degree, our timetable is a little bit more varied. So sort of 1 week isn't necessarily the same, as the other. So some courses might have classes every 2 weeks. Some might put all the teaching into the first 6 weeks, and then it's kind of more independent learning for the latter part. But I would say over the past few years, between week 1 and 11, because the teaching semesters are sort of 11-week blocks, mid-September to early December, and then early to mid-January, depending on when New Year's Day is. Early to mid-January till sort of now, basically, is your 11 weeks. So in our degree, the 6th week in the middle is a reading week, and there's usually not any taught classes in that week. Gives people a time to catch up on reading or to do coursework. But I would say in sort of weeks 1 to 5 and 7 to 11, the average timetable will probably be 3 days on campus. And of those 3 days, the average would probably be about 3 or 4 hours of actual class time. So a typical week, you'll probably have between maybe 8 and 12 hours of teaching, which seems a bit light, but once you're in it, it really won't feel light. Some are sort of 1 hour kind of traditional lectures, some are 1 hour labs, 1 hour tutorials, some are sort of 2 hour seminars or 2 hour tutorials. And the university tries to timetable as much as it can between 9 and 5, but occasionally there might be something that runs till 6, or even sometimes 7, but that's really rare on our program, really rare on our program. And as usual, people try to avoid Mondays and Fridays, partly because of things like bank holidays, Good Friday, these kind of things. You don't want to lose or you don't want to, you don't want to be on 9 Mondays and 1 Tuesday, because that just gets confusing. So obviously, the competition for rooms on Tuesdays and Thursdays is pretty hot, but we generally sort of teach Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And we try to kind of respect the traditional thing of not much teaching on a Wednesday, because again, that's sort of clubs and sports and societies, but also for staff, that's often when we have a lot of committees, sort of standing committees and departmental meetings and these kind of things. So yeah, the average student, I would say, would probably be in Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. But sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 2. It kind of changes from week to week, just because different courses need to have slightly different delivery patterns. And I know that can be a wee bit unusual, because as an undergraduate, each week tends to be really quite similar to the others. So it does take a wee bit of getting used to. But again, one of the things that the university has is a personalised timetable app. So again, that's a really nice thing, and it's portable and it's accessible, because we need it as much as anyone else. Because sometimes you'll be in the main building in week 1, you might be in the Adam Smith building in week 2, might be in the School of Education week 3, which can be frustrating. But again, I don't like the idea that you would do your entire psych studies degree and maybe only have seen 4 rooms. It can be frustrating. But hi.
Are classes during the day or evening?
Generally, they would be between 9 and 5. And again, people try to avoid 9 o'clock. People try to avoid 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. But yeah, there is the possibility that some classes might be scheduled at 5 till 6. But again, we really, really try to avoid that. And we try to avoid 9 o'clock because, a number of our students are carers or parents. So, getting to 9 o'clock classes can be a little tough for some people. So yeah, we try to do as much as we can, sort of 10 till 4. And again, that's good in Glasgow because in the winter, the day is very short. So again, we try to avoid having to force people out in the dark. Because it can get a little depressing. But we're in spring now, so that's nice. Days are getting longer.
Still freezing, but
It was, yeah, yesterday we had a proper frost. I had to de-ice the car yesterday.
yeah, a colleague said that as well. They were like, I just had to defrost the car, and I was like, no.
But by 11 o'clock it was proper warm.
Yeah.
I'd had to go outside for a wee bit of time yesterday, and I was like, wow, this is nice.
Yeah, I'm in the process of moving at the moment. I'm moving today and tomorrow, so
okay,
just hoping it stays dry so that my furniture doesn't get...
Yes, yeah, I was unloading a van on Monday afternoon, and again it was a race against the drizzle to try and get things in the house, and books and furniture and fabric, all this stuff.
Better to be doing it now than September. So
oh, that's true. That's true. Well, good luck. I hope that goes smoothly. I mean, if I'm just going to check the chat window. Oh yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome, Milton. So if you're fine to stay, if you want to head off, absolutely fine. Again, thank you so much for giving up your time to come along and ask really, really good questions. And again, if you're engaging with this presentation through the recording, please do reach out to us if you have any inquiries. We want to help. We're not necessarily here to give a hard sell to the degree. We want to make sure that this is the right thing for the right reasons, because we obviously don't want people to come and have a bad time. We want people to come and be successful. So yeah, please do reach out if there's anything that isn't clear enough or that you need to know more about.